No, don't read all that stuff. That's if I'm doing a big speech.
Well, I'll just let Scott do his own introduction today. How was that?
Oh, I hate when they read all that stuff. Well, I will give you a brief introduction just so y'all know my connections with this community in particular. I am a Winthrop grad. We have any Winthrop grads in the... Okay, we got a few out there. I graduated in 1981, so I was one of the first of the men that came on the Winthrop campus years ago who actually lived there. And then went on to Emory, where I got a master's in divinity, and I am actually an ordained United Methodist minister. Preached for 10 years in South Carolina, including at Lisa and Russ's church. And so they were members of mine a while back, and and Russ's parents were members of my church from down that direction in Long. And so then decided after 10 years of preaching that I had just about had it with what I saw with senior care in the state of South Carolina. This was before there was a terminology called assisted living. We had some places called residential care centers, but for the most part, what little independent and assisted living that we had was contained in some of the church-related not-for-profit entities out there. But for the rest of it, it was pretty sad shape. If you got to be old and needed care and help, there was not a lot of choices for you. And so that was really what drove me into healthcare, was trying to figure out a better way for seniors. We've seen things come a long way in the last few years, and I'm actually very proud because here in Rock Hill, I will tell you this is what I pick on my nursing home friends out there, is that when we first came in and purchased what was Ebenezer Nursing Home, which is now Agape Rehab Center, we started doing renovations to that building. And we didn't have a lot of cash on hand to be able to do that, and no bank was going to finance that project, so we had to do that out of our own pockets. But over a period of time, we were able to start renovating that building, and we got to be known as the nicest building in town. Well, it wasn't long after that I guess that's Westminster built right after that. They started building their new nursing home because they were still in the old wing for their nursing home on the bottom floor. So they started doing renovations or building that new building. And then it wasn't long after that Pruitt Corporation, who owns that Rock Hill Rehab right across from the hospital, they did a complete renovation of their building. And then White Oak Manor had to go out and build a whole nother building because they had to compete against Agape. And I say that because here's the interesting component. If you go look at the rest of the corporations like White Oak and UniHealth, they have not renovated their other buildings in places where there's not an Agape. So it's kind of interesting that they chose only to do the places where the competition was tough. But the truth is, guys, is that we're going to offer the care and services. We need to offer really nice places. And it should be a place at the end of your life that you should go and have wonderful care and a wonderful environment rather than just whatever's available. But I grew up, my mother probably instilled in me my love for older adults. And back in the day, she used to take me out in Lawrence, where I grew up, to what they call the county home. And that was where everybody landed up that nobody could take care of. And we did. We called the county, it was the poorhouse for the most part. That's where all the poor old people that didn't have anybody else to take care of them had to land. And it was not a nice place at the time, but I could see the love of the people who were trying to take care of those folks. They did whatever they could with what they had. And so I just decided that that's not the way I certainly want to end my life or want my parents to end their life, so we needed to change things. Over the last 15 or almost 20 years that I've been in the senior health care business, I guess we'll call it, I've come across a lot of things, and what I found mostly is that that our world is very uneducated as to how to take care of seniors. Even my friends who are doctors and lawyers who you would think would know a little bit of everything about everything, they're the ones that know the least about how to take care of senior adults. And so, and even the doctors who take care of senior adults have no real concept of what happens after that 5 or 10 minute office visit that they have with those patients. and so they don't really understand a lot of the difficulties that that person is going through. And so I had so many people coming to me, friends as well as just people in the community, and they would always be asking me, well, Scott, here's the question. Here's what's going on with my mom. You know, tell me what to do. And so I finally got to the point, I said, well, I'm just going to write a book, because it'll be a whole lot easier for me to write all this stuff down. And I was predominantly finding that it was the children of the senior adults who didn't know what to do. And so I wrote the book as if an adult child is reading this on how to take care of their seniors. But I also tell seniors that you really need to be reading this book before your children do, so that you are able to talk to them about what your wishes and desires are and what your plans are. But the point of it, it's called the 9 conversations you need to have with your aging loved one. And the point is you should start having conversations about the issues long before the time happens where you're going to need to do something. So I always like to describe this as with your children. At what age do you start talking to children or young people about sex and drugs? Anybody got an idea? At what age do you think is appropriate?
Early teens.
6 or 8, yeah, good. That's probably
younger and younger all the time.
Younger and younger all the time. Now, you don't tell everything at 6, you know, but you probably start having some conversations about what that is at a young age, and then over a period of time, you have had all the conversations, hopefully, they need. And that's really the way it should be. Now, but we don't think about that for our seniors. We just wait till some crisis situation occurs. And like my friend Max, who called me up one night, it was 10:30 at night, woke me up, and he said, oh, Scott, I hope I didn't wake you up. No, Max, you didn't wake me up. Do y'all ever do that? So I said, no, Max, what's going on? And Max says, well, my mom just called, and they've taken my dad to the hospital. And he said, I don't know what to do. All right, now, I knew enough about Max to know that his dad was 5 years old, I think. Mom was 82. And Mom had a little bit of dementia, is what he thought. And I'm not sure how you have a little bit sometimes. So a little bit of dementia. And so he said, well, what do I need to do? And I said, well, Max, you need to go to the hospital right now. And he said, really? I mean, it was kind of like, well, his parents lived in Spartanburg, he lived in Columbia. And that first thought was, I don't know what to do. And so I said, yes, go to the hospital, and then tomorrow you call me with whatever's going on with your dad, and we'll figure out what to do. Well, over the course of the next couple of days, what Max figured out was that his mother had a lot of dementia, not a little bit. But here was what was happening. Dad was in bad health. He couldn't see or hear very well. Mom could see and hear, but she had no clue what she was doing most days. And so Mom was still driving a car, and Dad was giving her instructions block by block as to what to do. And so as Max started having to take care of Mom the next few days while Dad was in the hospital, he realized that Mom wasn't functioning very well. And so I coached with him, and I said, well, Max, you have no choice but to bring your mom to your house. And so he had to bring her down to Columbia. And I said, here's what we're going to do, is when Dad comes out of the hospital, which is only going to be a few days, you're going to bring him for rehab in Columbia. Because there's no way you're going to be able to, unless you hire somebody to sit with Mom and take care of her, and then somebody who's going to watch for him in the facility. So that's how they transitioned to Columbia. Over the next few weeks, we coached about a lot of different things, and I gave him the guidelines that he needed to help because Max had a brother and a sister that also needed to participate in this care. He had to also coach with them on how that was going to occur, because they all had their own opinions. His brother's an auto mechanic, Max is a salesperson, and sister, I'm not sure, has worked in years. She was kind of a stay-at-home mom person. None of them had the expertise to really help make those decisions. But that was the inspiration, honestly, for my book, was that maybe it was that line that you just draw in the sand when you realize that your best friend doesn't really understand the care he needs to provide to his parents, and I'm in that business. So I sat down and started writing a book. It took me almost 2 years, a year to write it, and then it took a year of a diligent team to proofread it, because that was not my forte, and to really help put it into context and edit it where it made sense for everybody. But the first half of the book is just the conversations you need to start having, like the sex and drugs that you have to talk with your children about. And so the last half of the book is really just talking about definitions. What an assisted living does, what independent living does, what a nursing home does, and what they can or can't do. Things like long-term care insurance, VA benefits. I mean, anything that you need to look at is just a resource manual. And it's a great place just to flip through and say, okay, let me see what I need to do about this. It doesn't, although we have the Agape star on there, it doesn't talk about Agape except if I'm giving illustrations. So it's not a sales book. I just want you to be aware of that. So here's how I started. I started out at that time with a conversation with my own parents. Currently my dad is 80, my mother is 78, and when my dad turned 65 is when I had my first conversation with him. I can't believe it's been 15 years. But my dad was getting ready to retire. He worked for Belk Department Stores for 45 years. He was a manager, and he knew how to manage people and manage time and take care of things, and pretty much he didn't need anybody's help for anything. And so that's the kind of guy that I'm getting ready to have to deal with. So I called my dad and my mom up. They lived up in Saluda, North Carolina, right outside of Hendersonville. I called them up one week and I said, hey, what y'all doing this weekend? And they said, well, we're just hanging around doing some stuff at the house. I said, well, how about I drive up Saturday morning and I want to take you out to lunch, and we'll just spend the day together. So that's what I did. Saturday morning, went up to Saluda, picked them up, and I said, where's a nice place to go in Hendersonville? Because my dad had worked in Hendersonville for the last 10 years of his life. And I said, I want to go where all your friends hang out, where it's really good and that stuff. Because what I found is that if you're going to have a difficult conversation with a senior adult, it's probably good to do that in a public setting where they can't yell and scream or act too much. Okay? Remember that the next time you're having that hard conversation. So we went to this wonderful little outdoor cafe in Hendersonville, and we sat down and had a great lunch, and as we were finishing up, I said, I got something I want to ask y'all about. I said, y'all live in Saluda, North Carolina, which is kind of an isolated place. It's 15 miles to the closest grocery store. There's nothing really much there. I said, what are you going to do when you die? I looked at my dad. I said, what are you going to do when you can no longer drive a car? He got real silent, and then he jumped up out of his seat, and he said, I did not pull out in front of that car the other day. I don't care what she said. I did not. My driving is just fine. And I went, oh my gosh. My parents have always been critical of each other's driving, and I just didn't really expect that. And I said, no. I said, calm down. What did she tell you? I know. I said, she did not tell me anything. I promise. I'm not talking about now, Dad. In 20 years, 30 years, I don't know how long it's going to be, but at some point, I'm going to realize that you can't drive any longer. You're dangerous. You're going to run over a child. Or actually, I had a guy years ago that moved into my facility when I was the administrator. He had backed up over his wife and killed her. He was he thought he put it in drive. He was pulling into the garage, and instead he put it in reverse, and she had walked her back around the car, and he ran over and killed her. It was, what a traumatic experience for the whole family. I mean, it was difficult. There was a son and daughter involved, and then for him, and he had to be placed in a home at that point because he just couldn't function any longer. So those are the kinds of things that I see in my industry I don't want to have happen, certainly to my own family. And so once I got my dad calmed down, I said, here's what I want to think about. You live in this isolated place, and I know you want to, my mother still will say that, she's so afraid I'm going to stick her in Agape one day. She is. It's just terrible. So because she wants to be independent. My mom and dad have built 5 houses together. That's their love of their life. They build houses. They work in the yard. My dad can build just about anything. My mother likes to plan and do all the stuff around the house. So I'm thinking, all right, what are we going to do now with them at some point they can't drive. So I told my dad, I said, here's the reason I bring that up. Right now, you're trying to figure out what to do. He had his retirement money that he had to pull out of his company and reinvest it. And I said, here's what I want you to do. I want $5,000 of whatever you're getting ready to set aside, and I want to put it in what I call the driving fund. And what we're going to do is at some point when I come to you and say you're no longer able to drive, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to either hire drivers, if that's what I need to do, maybe find a stay-at-home mom or a college kid, or if there's enough money in the account, we'll hire a limousine, just something so that I know they can show up at your house every day or every other day or whatever your schedule is. You'll know that on these days I have a driver and I can do whatever I want to do. And my dad said, well, that's not a bad idea, but he said, I don't need you to do that. He said, I can hire a driver, we don't need to have a separate. And I said, oh, no. I said, Dad, I love you to death, but you are the cheapest man on the face of this earth. He will not hire anybody to do anything that he thinks he can do himself. And I said, so here's what's going to happen. Because this was back 15 years ago now, and the minimum wage was less than $5 an hour, is probably $3 or $4, and I said, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to come along and say, I'm getting ready to hire. We got to hire somebody and pay them $10 an hour to drive. $10 an hour? He said, absolutely not. I would never pay. And I said, that's why you can't be in charge of the driving fund. Because at some point now, down today, it would probably cost you $10 an hour to find somebody to drive you around. And what happens is when we retire and 20 to 30 years later we look back, things have changed a lot in terms of the price of things. And so we set up our little driving fund. That was the beginning of our driving conversation. Now, I will tell you, you can have that conversation just as easily with somebody who's 90 or somebody who's 80. And the way you do it is, at 90, here's the conversation. How many 100-year-old people do you know that are driving? And they're going to give you the name of one or two. They'll have it right on the tip of their tongue. They'll say, oh, Susie's still driving. Right. And how many others? That's one or two. In all likelihood, by the time you get to be 100, you're not going to be able to drive. So let's go ahead and start planning for what we need to do. Now, actually, you may have to take the car keys away 3 weeks from now, depending on how bad it is. But what we found out, for example, in Max's case, with his mom, as Max started going through things at his parents' house, he found a drawer full of tickets that his mom had gotten. And then even further, what was vast, he found a lawsuit where his mother had run into the back of somebody, and the guy was suing because he was hurt. And further, as Max contacted the insurance agent about it, that his dad had only had $25,000 worth of liability insurance is all he had on there. Well, that wouldn't pay for a hospitalization or therapy or anything at all. Fortunately, the man wasn't severely hurt, but had they done that, they could have actually they would have sued. This guy could have sued his parents, and they would have been bankrupt. Fortunately, the guy settled for the $25,000 from the insurance company, and they were able to get away with that. But that's the other scary thing. A lot of times seniors don't realize how expensive things are and what kind of insurance liabilities that they need to have. So those are some questions that will spark your interest in the book, is having those conversations with your senior loved ones about everything. About, well, how will they afford long-term care if they need it? Do they have long-term care insurance? Are they adequately insured on their home or their car? Those are a lot of things. You have to have that financial story with them as well. Back to my parents. My dad turned, I guess he was about 73 or 74. My mom's 2 years younger. I get a telephone call one afternoon. It was the middle of the afternoon, 3 o'clock. I look down. I'm in a meeting with, I guess there's probably 10 other people in the meeting. I'm leading the meeting, so it's kind of hard for me. But I saw the phone ring, and I looked down, and I saw that it was my mother. And so, of course, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What do? I just hit that little button to make it go voicemail. Y'all ever do that? You're the same person's calling y'all, and you just click, it goes voicemail. Well, a few minutes later, the phone rings again. I look down, it's my mom, and I'm thinking, oh, she's probably just dialed me again accidentally, and so I cut it off. But then on the third call from my mother, I'm realizing something bad must have happened. And so I excuse myself from the meeting, and I tell them, my mother has called 3 times. There could be a problem. I'm going to go check on it. So I go outside, and right outside the door, and I call her back, and she answers the phone, and I said, "Hey, Mom," and I was kind of being quiet because I didn't want them to hear me next door. And I said, "Is everything okay?" "No, it's not okay," she says. And I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill us both." And I said, "Who's going to kill you?" I thought somebody broke in the house or something. "Your daddy. He's driving all over the road." She said, "There's trucks coming left and right, and he can't hear and he can't see anymore." And I told him, I'm just scared to death, and I just told him, "Just stop and let me out right here in the middle of the road." And I said, "No, don't do that." And I said, "Where are you?" And she said, "Well, we've been to Kentucky to see your grandmother." And she was in a nursing home in Kentucky. She said, "When?" And I said, "Kentucky? And you didn't let me know that you took off to Kentucky?" She said, "Oh, well, we've been gone 4 or 5 days." And I said, "Really? Wow. Well, we didn't want to bother you," she said. But it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she's bothering me. And I said, so they were on their way back from Kentucky, and they were coming in to Asheville on I-40. There had been a rock slide. And so there was minimal traffic lanes opened up, and the trucks were driving on both sides. She got scared, and she was panicking. And so at that point, I said, I heard my dad from the other way. He said, "If she would stop yelling and screaming, I would just be fine. But every time I get everything's fine, she screams and I jerk, and then something happens." And so I said, "Oh my God." So anyway, I said, "Do this, Mom." I said, "You just got to be quiet right now. You're in the middle of an interstate. You cannot stop." I said, "Tell Dad to pull over at the next stop, and y'all call me from there." And I said, if you can't get, at that point, if I have to, I'll get in the car and I'll come pick you up." And so she said, "Oh, okay." And I said, "But be quiet, okay?" So I go back into my meeting, hardly concentrating, and when I got through, I guess it's about an hour. It was more than likely probably about 2 hours later. I'd probably forgotten about it at that point. And so I came out of the meeting. I called my mother up, and I said, my Mom said, "Hey," and I said, "Hey." I said, "Everything all right?" She said, "Sure." I said, "Well, where are you?" And she said, "Well, we're at home. I'm unpacking, trying to do some laundry, and, opening up the house. Are you doing okay?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And so I realized at that point, Mom was I think she realized what she had done, and she was just trying to, sweep this under the carpet. And so I hung up with her, and a couple of days later I called and I said, "Hey," I said, "What you doing?" She said, "Oh, not much." I said, "What are y'all doing Saturday? I think we'll come up and let's go out to lunch." She didn't get it at that point, fortunately. So I did. Here was the conversation at lunch. "Look, you can't go to Kentucky by yourself anymore. You are not driving those long trips." And my dad, tried to defend himself. "I'm a good driver." And I said, "I know you're a good driver, Dad." I said, "You're just not a good driver with her in the car." Okay? So driving around town, I'm sure you're going to be fine. But from here on out, we're not driving to Kentucky. I said, here's the deal. If you need to go, you call me. I'll either come pick you up and take you, or I'll hire somebody. I said, "I've got lots of people that work for me. If I'm too busy to do it, I'll find somebody who will drive you to Kentucky so you can go see your mom." A few weeks later, I got a telephone call from my mom, and she said, "Your grandmother's not doing well. I think your dad needs to go." And I said, "Well, I'll come up and get you, and we'll all go." And she said, "No, I'm not feeling well." And she said, and I think really your dad just needs some time with his mom, and without me around." And so I said, "Great." And so I called my dad back, and I said, "How about let's going up this weekend to see Grandma?" And I went up Friday night after work. I spent the night with my parents in Hendersonville. The next morning, my dad and I drove to Lexington, Kentucky. It's about a 7-hour trip. I'll tell you, it was a great trip. What a wonderful time I had, just me and my dad. I don't think my dad and I had been by ourselves for that length of time in at least 30 years, I had a chance. We talked about my business and his business, and he talked to me about all kinds of things, gave me some great advice. We went up, saw my grandmother. We spent a night in a hotel room. I don't know if I've ever just spent a night in a hotel room with my dad by myself, But we did. We had a wonderful trip on the way back. My grandmother lived 3 more years after that. She had a bad week, but she was still in pretty good shape. I would have never, that was the best trip of my life, guys. I would have never had that trip had I not had that difficult conversation with my parents about driving. The next conversation I had with my parents was about where they're going to live when they can't live by themselves any longer. And so we started having that conversation early on. And I said, so they finally, they talked about it for a long time, and they said, you know, I'm an only child now because my brother died about 12 years ago. And so all of a sudden I became the person that I knew would have to take care of my parents. And so my mom called one day and she said, you know, we've been talking about that conversation we had with you about where we're going to live. And she said, we decided we're going to come to Columbia. And whenever it's time. Not that it's not time now. You know, she wants to live in her house all of her days. So anyway, I invited, I said, well, let's do this. From here on out, every time you have an appointment with what I call the ologist, you know, whether it's a cardiologist or the dermatologist or the rheumatologist or the psychologist, which I think my mother probably needs, I said, let's make those appointments in Columbia. And that way, when you get ready to have your appointments, you can come down to Columbia, spend a couple of days with us, and then you can go see all your doctors and go back to North Carolina, because they've been going to Asheville, which the traffic in Asheville is somewhere I really didn't want them driving a lot. So they did. Well, after, I guess it was probably about a year into this system, and it was working beautifully. My mother had an orthopedic surgeon. She had had some surgery, so she had it done here down in Columbia, and I was able to be there. We were able to take care of her. They proclaimed that they were ready to move. And I was kind of shocked and surprised. Now, it took us 2 years during that housing crunch to sell their house up there and get them moved to Columbia. But they finally did. And of course, you know, as I told you, they like to build houses. I told them, I'm not allowing you to build another house. You're almost 80 years old. You are not building the house. So they bought a house, and they basically gutted it and renovated it. Lived with me for 3 months. I thought it would be awful. It wasn't. It was great. My wife and my mother had never spent a lot of time together. I didn't think they were going to like each other, but they do. And they never knew they really liked each other until they had to live together. And so what I'm telling you is that in all of these conversations you have, it will build and help to build and create a relationship with your family that you may not have ever had you not have those difficult conversations. And so I'm not going to go through them all today, because you can do that by reading the book. But I will say is encourage you to go ahead and try to have those conversations, make some decisions. And as long as people realize that if we're not talking today, we're talking about somewhere down the road, it's a whole lot easier for you to have those talks. Okay, so I'm going to open it up if you've got some questions about anything. Our business is nursing homes and assisted livings and physicians and those kinds of things. So if you have any questions about those, I'll be glad to take them.
How long has Agape been in existence? Are you fairly new organization?
Well, not really. Actually, Agape, I founded Agape 15 years ago. And we started out with a 40-bed assisted living facility. I had actually been the director for Lutheran Homes of South Carolina and ran 6 facilities for them when we were able to purchase this first facility. Today, we have 10 assisted living facilities across the state, 3 nursing homes, a hospice house, and we're actually the largest hospice provider in the state of South Carolina. We've recently got into physician practices, and the reason we started hiring doctors and nurse practitioners because we couldn't find good doctors to come to our buildings. You know, and in fact, when we first came up to Rock Hill, Dr. Jewell, who's a great doctor in this town, he was the medical director for 7 nursing homes and I guess 10 or 12 assisted living facilities, and it was him and 2 nurse practitioners. Well, there's just no way that 3 people can get around and see that many sick old people, you know, at that time. And so that's really what kind of moved us to looking at, can we hire our own physicians so that we have, because what would happen a lot of times, we have a doctor who, I'll come out on Wednesday afternoon because that was his day off in the office, and then something would happen Wednesday and he couldn't show up, and all of a sudden you've got sick people that you're a lot of times having to transport in an ambulance back and forth to a doctor's office. It wasn't a good practice. So we started hiring those docs. But here's my conclusion now. We have 60 practitioners that work for us now. And we've actually got clinics, like here in Rock Hill, we've got 4 clinics in Columbia all over town. I want a doctor, at my age, I'm 55, but when I turned 50, I said, I want a doctor who knows what I'm going to look like not what I used to look like. And so I want a doctor who has taken care of people with multiple issues and diagnoses and who can recognize in me the signs and symptoms of people that he may be caring for there. So we've actually got quite a thriving business in Columbia of the 50-plus-year-olds who are coming to Agape Primary Care for their physician services because they like to know those doctors who really understand and know what's going to happen to them down the road.
So they're full-time employees of you?
Oh, yes,
These
they're-
doctors, they don't have a private practice, they're just...
No, they're full-time. For example, like Dr. Stoner is our physician here with the clinic. Now, he stays in the clinic most days, but he does rotate over to the nursing homes on some. Dr. Liu also takes some clinic patients here, but we've also got 4 nurse practitioners and PAs here in Rock Hill right now, and they go to our facilities and also see patients in the clinic as well. Yeah, but we are able to schedule that so everybody is seen. We actually just hired Dr. Hammett, who is a neurologist in Columbia, and he's been coming up here to Rock Hill as well. He comes, I think, maybe once or twice a month to see patients because we couldn't find a good neurologist that would come to our facilities, and so he sees them in the facility and also sees them in the clinic as well.
So you live in Columbia?
I live in Columbia. That's right. Yeah.
And you have 10 facilities?
We have 14 facilities. We have 10 of them are assisted livings, and we have one in Charleston. We've got 3 down in the Grand Strand area. So it's been interesting as we've spread around the state because people will know us in different areas. But Mom, they live in a different place. Like I've got friends in Columbia who've actually got their moms moved into the one in Garden City because that's where they retire down at the beach, and then they wanted to stay there and live there. But then they may transfer back later as they age or have more health issues to be near children.
And this is independent living, they live there till they meet.
Absolutely. Yeah, the way we've done it is a little bit differently. Like you may go over like Westminster Towers, for example, you have the apartments over there. Their apartments are independent. And in South Carolina, you're not able to provide hands-on care in an independent living facility through the facility itself. And in particular, the problem is medication administration because we found that administering the meds is the first sign that's usually the first issue that causes for seniors is they get their meds mixed up, either taken too much or not enough, and they end up in the hospital. We believe about 80% of our seniors that land in the hospital are there because they've had some kind of medication error. So that's been the big issue. Well, in independent living, even though like at Westminster, for example, or over at, what's that other independent place? Park Point, what they'll do is they'll have senior helpers come in and do some things for them, but they can't administer the meds all day long. Like they can set them up, put them in a pill planner, but they can't really be assured that they'll take them. So what we did is we licensed all of our apartments as assisted living. So if you go over to our York or Rock Hill facility, you'll see some pretty large apartments there, but they're all still licensed. You may not need that service when you come in, but you know that eventually you'll be able to have that.
Westminster has their own now, their own medication. They pass out pills and make sure you take them, and it's called like home.
Yeah, that's right. Home Bridge. Yeah, and what you have to do is pay separately for a nurse to if they. I don't know if they have a nurse going room to room because they don't. In independent living, it has to be a licensed nurse to do that, which would be really expensive. So
I'm not sure what they're doing.
yeah, I think they do. They set them up in pill planners is probably what they do. But by law, they can't administer it unless it's a licensed nurse. And that's the other interesting thing is that in South Carolina, to administer medications to someone else, you either have to be a family member or it has to be a licensed nurse, unless you're licensed as an assisted living facility, so that we can pass those meds. So that's where it really kind of gets complicated in South Carolina. Charlotte's a little bit different.
Well, where does hospice come in? Because hospice can administer drugs to
well, as long as it's a nurse, it has to be, and that's probably a registered nurse that's they're administering medications in the home, but they can't be there every second of every day. And that's part of the problem. So it really goes back to that caregiver, that family member that would have to do it. But let's just say you hire a caregiver into your home. That caregiver, by law, cannot take pills out of a bottle and hand them to you to take. that by law, she can, and that's the way you senior helpers has to operate that way too. But a lot of people do that. They hire people, you know, just come work for me in my house, and then they start administering those medications. But that's actually practicing medicine without a license, and they could go to jail for that. So you got to be real careful about that as well. One of the things I'll just tell you about, the great things about companies like Senior Helpers is they take care of things for you like taxes and insurance. For that, I had some people that in the past who just said, well, I'm going to hire somebody. I had one guy, he said, I always hired my caregivers from the grocery store. If they were at the checkout center, if I liked them a few times, I'd just say, hey, come work for me and I'll pay you under the table. Well, great, except for one, he didn't pay their federal payroll taxes, which was illegal for him to do, and he also didn't cover workers' compensation or health insurance. So what would happen is if somebody gets hurt in your home and you've hired them and they're not working for a legitimate company, they can sue you for that injury. And you know, somebody could pull their back lifting a person, and you could see a $200,000 bill on that. And so if you're not insured, it can be dangerous. So
And also safety and security.
So yeah, safety and security. We found so many people who, you know, they'll have a caregiver that they just loved, but then all of a sudden things got missing, you know, and so there's no coverage for that. There's no way to monitor that at the same time. Now, at the same time, I will tell you that a lot of our older folks, they lose stuff. I never forget this. We had this one lady who came in one day when I was the administrator at this facility, and she said, Scott, your people are just stealing my mother. They've just taken every single, I left some money, just enough for her to go to Walmart. They've taken her money, her rings, everything is gone. And I said, really? So I grabbed my business office manager, and I said, come on down, we're going to go down and go through this room. We found the stuff wrapped up in a grocery bag, and she had hidden it in the back of a drawer and forgot about it. And mom couldn't figure out where it was. So you know, a lot of times there's innocence in that. I always tell folks, before you start accusing somebody of stealing, let's do a thorough check for that. But there are a lot of safety and security issues. But we've also found that in even facilities, because we've seen, I know y'all seen the newspapers, you've had some issues that have gone on facilities too, so making sure that everybody's checked.
And elderly abuse happens.
It does, and I will say, as a pastor, I saw more elderly abuse in the homes than I ever did in the nursing homes. The nursing homes weren't nice back in those days when I was preaching, but the homes were awful. Like, I remember going to see one of my shut-ins, and I remember the second time I went to see her, I tried to go about every 2 weeks to every 4 weeks, and I walked in and I said, we were talking, and I said, well, what are you going to have for lunch today? She said, well, I really don't have much left. And I said, when's the last time you're like, somebody's been in this house? And she said, well, it was when you were here 2 weeks ago. And I said, you're telling me nobody else has been in this house? And she said, my daughter came last month. It had been over a month since somebody had been in her house, not taking her food or groceries or anything else.
She didn't drive.
And she didn't drive, right. She was a shut-in. Now, I've got some other shut-ins that when I went to see them, they were always out. Never could figure that one out either. You can't go to church, but you can go to Walmart. So, y'all probably find that true, too. All right, any other questions?
Why did you choose agape as the name, and what does it mean?
Well, that's a good point. Agape means godly love, and it is the Greek word. And there's three words for Greek, and 3 words for love in the Greek language, and agape means godly love. Although I'll have to tell you that agape, I didn't choose agape chose me. And the reason is the way the first building that we bought as agape was already named agape, and it was this wonderful couple that had built this 40-bed assisted living facility because their mother needed care and they couldn't find any place, so they built this. Actually, it was only 20 beds in the beginning. They were really building it for her and some of her friends so that they could move her in, and they struggled over the name, but they were good Baptists, actually. So we got Baptist background in our blood here. They were good Baptists, and the woman who started it, her husband, woke up one morning and he had been reading the day before about something and had the word agape in it, and he woke up and he said agape. He said, because that's what we want to do is share godly love. And so I was able to adapt that with as we brought it on, and it was
And where was
great.
this, what city?
In Columbia, South
That's
Carolina.
where it started.
That's where it started, yeah. And we're only in South Carolina. People ask me all the time, why don't you go somewhere else? And I said, well, South Carolina's my home. I was a Methodist minister. I lived and traveled all throughout this state, and there's still a lot more to be done here. And so once it's all done here, maybe we'll go somewhere else, but I don't know if that's going to happen. We got a lot to do. Yes, ma'am.
Your book, is it a practical, I'm looking for something that you can fill in the
Absolutely.
blanks on, asking questions and things. And I started trying to do it myself, and I think I'm losing it because I couldn't think of all the stuff I wanted to put down.
Right, yeah, I think you'll see it, like I said, the first part will go through all the 9 conversations. I actually had a man who read it. When it first came out, I didn't even know he could get a copy of it except through us at that point. He ordered it on Amazon. And I was doing a seminar like this, and he said, Scott, I'm going to let you know, I'm going to let everybody know, I went and bought your book last week and read it. And then I went to see my 89-year-old father, who lives out in a farm outside of Columbia. And he said, I never thought that I needed to say anything because he's remarried since my mom died, and his wife is younger than me. And he said, so I always kind of assumed it was her job. Well, what he realized from reading through this book is, no, you're responsible for your parents, And so he said, I went out and I had all 9 conversations in one afternoon. They just went through them real quick and went through all the conversations. And he said, when I got through with it, I looked over and he said, there was a tear running down my dad's cheeks. And he said, I don't know if I've ever seen my father cry. And he looked and he said, Dad, I didn't mean to upset you. He thought he had upset him by bringing up all these things about aging. And his dad said, that's not why I'm crying. He said, all these years I just thought you didn't care. Wow. I said, that was worth writing this book about. I mean, just for that man and his dad, for them to build that. But it is practical. There's even there's a chapter in here about urinary incontinence, because that is a huge issue with senior adults. Urinary tract infections are very common among men and women. We think a lot of times it's just women, but my father-in-law probably has a urinary tract infection once every 3 to 4 months. We don't know what all causes it. He's been going to the urologist, had all kinds of medications and tests, but we can tell when he starts to get very confused, or he gets real sick real easily. We can find and we just say, gosh, let's run a test and see if he's got a urinary tract infection and start him on antibiotics. Yeah. So there's a lot of practical aspects.
How much is the book?
How much is the book? Well, if you order it from Amazon, and I think it costs you like $13.95 now. All the proceeds for the sale of the book go to our foundation, and we have a Agape Senior Foundation, and we take care of people even when they run out of money. And so most of the proceeds of the book go to help pay for medications and doctor visits where those people wouldn't have been able to afford to go. So it's $10 from us. If you want it from Amazon, you can also order it on your Kindle. So if you want an electronic version, it's a little bit cheaper there. Yeah. But we've got some books here, and the $10, if you want to write a check, it's to the Agape Foundation. And we're real proud of the fact that we've never asked anybody to move out of Agape because they ran out of money. We've asked them to move because they refused to spend their money, or particularly the children. And that's one of the things about this, is getting your kids to read it. I run into, I had a guy came to me a few years back, and he said, Scott, I just wanted to let you know, Mom's going to be out of money next month. And she lived in the nice, this was when I was at Lutheran Home, in the nicest house we had. We had a 4,000 square foot house, and she lived in this huge house out there, had a nice car, always had money. And I said, oh my God. I said, what happened? You lose it all in the stock market or something? And he said, no. He said, Mom's been very generous to her children and grandchildren. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we've been doing estate planning, and we've basically given all Mom's money away, and so now we're going to file for Medicaid and whatever your foundation can provide for us. And I said, oh, really? I said, well, let me give you a little tidbit. If you were to go file for Medicaid right now, and you put down that all this, you didn't put all these assets, that's illegal. I said, Medicaid has a look-back period. They look back 5 years, but the law says this: if you transfer assets in order to fraudulently apply for Medicaid, they don't care how long you go back. They could go back 10 years if they thought that was your intent. But here's another sad. Well, it was amazing. By the next Wednesday, she had all her money back. Yeah. So, but I had a lady in my church years ago, and she said I went to go see her. Very, very well educated, dressed well. I thought was probably one of my wealthier members of my congregation. And I went to visit her, and when I got there, she lived in a very small single wide trailer. And so as we were talking, she said, "I bet you're wondering why you see me here." And I said, "Well, I'm a little curious, but it's up to you if you want to tell me." And she said, I don't have anything. I can't give anything to the church. I've given my life there." But she said, a few years ago, my son had me transfer all my assets into his name in case I ever ended up in a nursing home. And he went bankrupt. Lost everything for her. So I always say, be real careful. In that a good attorney can guide you in that direction. I'm all about setting up trust. I do believe that older people should give their money away if they can, as long as they can afford to take care of themselves. I think the best way for your children for you to enjoy the inheritance that they may get. So I always tell folks, because most inheritances are spent within, I think they said 6 months, the average inheritance, because they go wild. Got a pot of money, we're buying a new car, new house, going on trips, all that kind of stuff, and you don't get to see it. And so I want to see my children enjoy it if I can afford to do it while I'm still here. And so I always say, the best way to do that is give them a trip. Say, I want you to go, if your kids never go on vacation, give them some money to go on a vacation, or if they need that house, do that. But make sure that you've taken care of yourself. And you can do that, long-term care insurance. The simplest way to do it. Buy the insurance, and that's going to be able to take care of you. I bought my first insurance policy, long-term care insurance policy, when I was 38 years old. And the reason was I was the administrator of a nursing home. I had a 38-year-old living with me. He had had a tragic accident, and he was quadriplegic. His family lost everything they had in order to take care of him. Eventually, his wife did have to file for divorce because that was the only way she was going to be eligible for Medicaid to take care of him. So it's a good way. Had an 86-year-old woman who bought a long-term care insurance policy, and you think, gosh, why at 86 would she buy that? She had money. She had about $500,000 in cash assets, and she said, I want that money to go to my niece. And she said, I can buy a policy right now. It cost her $900 a month. But she said, let's say, Scott, in 5 years from now, I go into the nursing home, and I've paid that, I don't know, $80,000, $60,000 or whatever. That's still less than $500,000, and then I'm covered. And so she said, it's just a wise investment.
I thought they had a cutoff period, but they didn't sell it beyond a certain age.
It's all health. It's health related. It can't be age related, but it's health related. And so, yeah, she was actually in pretty good health. I don't know if she's still around. She could be 108 today, but she calculated it out to figure out how it made financial sense for her. Yeah, so you just never know. Yeah, it's always something good.
Well, there are a lot of policies that if you can't afford it after they start raising the prices, that you get the money back that you paid in.
Absolutely, and there's some that has life insurance benefits tied to it as well. You do have to be careful, because what will happen is at certain ages they'll start jumping up the premiums on it. Yeah, that happened with my parents as they hit, I think it was like 75 maybe was the big jump for them. And my dad said, well, I'm just going to cancel it. And I said, oh, no, you're not. I said, that thing is worth too much, And so, but again, he's the cheapest man on earth. And so I had to have that conversation with him. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Of course, most of the long-term care insurance things have to give you the choice if you want to pay for inflation stuff, the 5%, whether it's compounded or straight.
Absolutely.
That helps some.
Absolutely, it does help. And so for me, for example, when I was I had disability insurance back as a younger person, and so I could count on the disability insurance to help take care of my family while I had the long-term care insurance to take care of me. As you get older, you don't necessarily need that, but you do have recurring income and you have cash assets. So you may always want to look at is, do I need, how big of a policy I need? Like the insurance people are always going to sell you the best one you can do. So they're going to say, oh, it's going to cost you $200 a day to go to a nursing home, so we're going to start at $200. But if you've got $1,500 in income, that's going to help offset it. And then if you're in a nursing home, you're probably not having to keep up your house and car and everything else either. So you've got to be careful, because sometimes you end up, I do see people who buy more than they really need with that as well. And I don't sell long-term care insurance, so I can say that. Yeah.
Well, the one I had, they were really good, because they told me it wasn't worth it for me to have the home care type, because I have no family here. I can only depend so much on neighbors. You know, I have wonderful ones, and they were honest about it.
Oh, well, I am impressed. I am. Whoever you go to, we should send everybody to.
Well,
That is
Transamerica.
Transamerica. That's a great point, because think about this. I know we all want to stay at home, but if you stay at home, Senior Helpers does some of that. But what would it cost if we wanted 24-hour sitters 7 days a week? About what's a rough estimate?
Anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 a month.
$6,000 to $10,000 a month, right? And so if you've got family, the problem becomes is, to me, it's social isolation, and mainly meaning that you're not around anybody but their caregiver. So right, if you don't have anybody else, then that, I gotta quit. If you don't have anybody else, 5 minutes. But if you don't have anybody else to take care of you, nobody else is coming to your house. And by the time you need it, your friends aren't going to be able to drive to see you either. So the only thing you see is your preacher, who is required to do those shut-in visits. So you're right. Where I love the places like Senior Helpers is coming right out of the nursing. Let's say you've been to the hospital, had hip or knee replacement, went to the nursing home or rehab center, you're coming back home for the first time. Senior Helpers coming in 3 days a week for 4 hours to clean your house, to help you to the grocery store, take you to the doctor. I mean, those are some prime times to use them. And occasionally that 24 hours may be appropriate for short lengths of period of time, or if you got a lot of family. You know, like my mother was living next door to me, hiring a 24-hour sitter, she doesn't have $10,000 a month to do that, and I'm not sure that would be worth it, but it could be for some families. So it can be very appropriate. You just have to look at what's best for you. Yeah. And you have to go ahead and pick out where you're going to go in case you do. About 50% of all seniors end up in a nursing home sometime during their life. Only about 20% die in nursing homes. And so really, you're playing those odds that I may be one of the 20% that has to be there.
Well, I learned early on when my husband was in a nursing home that I had to arrange so that I had enough money for a private room.
Yes.
Because I found out that before he was there very long, that the private pay patients get much better care and attention and don't have to put up with roommates.
Well, I will say, now, here's the other side. I'm going to tell you the flip story. When my grandmother was in the nursing home in Kentucky, she was very mentally alert, but physically her hands had drawn up and she couldn't move or walk, and so they were dependent on it. And so what we did is I said, I want her in a semi-private room. And the reason is because the caregivers have to come in twice as often because there's 2 people in the room to care for them. So here's what we did, though. I said, I want to get people to be in there. This was when flat screen TVs just came out. And my grandmother loved to watch Kentucky basketball and the Kentucky Derby. And so I said, I want you to get the biggest flat screen that you can and put it on the wall in front of her bed. And she will never be alone. And she wasn't. When the ball games happened, the whole room, everybody was in there watching the basketball games on her TV. So it's always a trick of the trade. But you're right, for most of us, having that private room is going to be really important. Or you get bad roommates or something like that. So, I know. The ones that yell and scream, and if you don't yell and scream, that's not really good either, too. So.
Well, the worst one was one who, no matter what the temperature was outside, I could not put on the air conditioning.
Oh, gosh.
And it was getting to 85 in that.
Well, I have a little lady, this will be my last story. I had a little lady who lived with me. I later found out that I was distantly related to her too. And then her grandson now works for us. This is Russell's grandmother. But she was in my first facility, and she did not have the money to be in a private room, but wanted to be one. Her husband had been a Pentecostal holiness preacher too. And so she dressed to the nines every day when she came out of her room. And what she would do to get rid of her roommates is she was on the side where the heating unit was. And so she would, but it's also on the wall where the window was, so she would crack the window and turn the heat up on high until you couldn't breathe in the room. And it took me months to figure out what she was doing, because all the roommates would just ask to be moved. And every time there was somebody in there, they would say, oh, I can't live with her, I gotta move. But that's how she thought she'd get a private room. I finally figured it out, though. We took care of her.
Is senior health part of Agape?
No, they are not. No, I just know he was here, so that's why I was giving him a plug for his business over here today. All right, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.